Hello there, this is Nick Zangl coming to you from California, USA. Thank you so much for being here. So, the long awaited Friends reunion with the full cast in the same room is now streaming on HBO Max, and I just watched it, and it is streaming here in the United States. But I wanted to give you some of my thoughts from the pre-speculation headlines that came out from the trailer, and did it actually what was shown in the trailer, which people were speculating on, did that actually come to fruition or was it a little over exaggerated? Then we will get into my initial thoughts as I first started watching the special, and then also my favorite parts, least favorite parts, and then as a fan of the show, some of the things I was expecting, did it live up to that? And then, of course, some other general comments that were just part of the episode. And at the end, I'm going to ask you a very important question, especially if you're someone who is a fan of the original show, Friends. And with that being said, let's get into it. So, pre-speculation. So, one of the biggest things, headlines that came out of the reunion once we learned more about what was going to happen and the trailer dropped, and we got more teasers and trailers, was the backlash over James Corden appearing to be the host of the reunion. Now, at the time when the trailer dropped and the teasers came out, we just got a kind of a press release of who was going to be involved. There wasn't really any indication of how involved or to what extent what was being shown or what was being told to us in the news or in the press release, how involved those people and those things were going to be, and in what way are they involved in the special. And I think for good reason, because obviously they wanted us to watch and they know the fans were going to watch. But I think their angle with that was to try to get maybe even a new audience, if there even is such a thing, to be interested in the special and then maybe go and watch the episodes again on HBO Max. But once I watched the special, and maybe you haven't watched it yet, but you're kind of wondering if you should watch it or not. I think if you were someone who was kind of skeptical about James Corden being the host, I think go ahead and watch it, because he actually didn't have as big of a role as I thought he was going to be. And when he was in there, I thought he actually did a good job of keeping the focus on the cast and their reunion and not making it all about himself. So I thought he was fine, and I actually didn't have a problem with him hosting. I think anyone in that role that I could think of that would be alternatives to him doing what he did, I think would be celebrated and be praised. Then there was also fan backlash over the seemingly random group of people that were said to be involved leading up to the premiere of the reunion. And they followed through with those people being involved, but I actually thought the way they included these people, from Justin Bieber to Cindy Crawford to Cara Delevingne to Malala to Kit Harrington from Game of Thrones, I thought they actually incorporated them just enough to get maybe their fans to watch and to give people enough to understand why they're being involved, which is that they were fans of the show or the show had some impact on them, and was really a way for from what I see, the people who put together the reunion to illustrate how wide reaching the show is and why this reunion is so special. So it settled my concern once they started introducing these people, and it wasn't just all about them. It still focused on the show and the reunion. So it settled my concerns on why they included them, and now I understand why they included them. And considering the scheduling issues and the state of the world, I think maybe if this had been filmed pre-pandemic, or maybe if they had waited even longer until everything was completely open and no one had any reservations and they're about being a part of it or going there live or just being a part of it in general, or there weren't any restrictions on what they could do, I think then they may have gotten more or less fan backlash from this, or maybe those people wouldn't have been involved. And so I think honestly, they probably had other people on the top of their list of people to be involved, but given, like I said, the state of the world and whatnot, maybe that was how they ended up with this group of people. So, two examples of this, how these people were involved, whether it be the boy band BTS or just Cara Delevingne and models and Justin Bieber in general. So, the first big cut to one of the people who were not on the show originally, not part of the reunion per se, were the boy band BTS. And their head member was the one that basically said that Friends was a show that was given to him by his mom on DVD, the episodes, and that is how the how he learned English basically, or helped him learn English. And like I said before, I wasn't sure what their angle was when they announced who would be featured, but I think, like I said before, they did a great job showing how the show has transcended even borders and any barriers, whether it be language or nationalities or national borders. And the well known people who are fans of Friends and their friends with them was really cool to me. And I think them sharing, for instance, Malala had her best friend on there, and her best friend's a fan of the show. And so they were talking about which friend they relate to most. And I think that was another overarching theme of the reunion, was how relatable the show was and the characters were. And those relatability transcends all these different things that often become barriers in our world. Then the part where some of the people who were mentioned to be featured, we weren't sure what they were going to be involved with. They had a fashion show of some famous people: Cindy Crawford, Cara Delevingne, Justin Bieber, and then another surprise, which I'll leave for the special. That way you can go. I'm not giving too much away if you haven't watched it yet, but if you watch it, you know who it is. They did a fashion show of some of the more memorable costumes or outfits from the show, and that is how they involved some of those people. So, again, if you were wondering how some of these people that were listed as being a part of this were involved in any way, I thought some of them were a little more creative than others, meaning some were just interviews and kind of sharing their experience with the show and how it impacted them. And then some were like to kind of highlight and remember and reminisce about some funny moments in the show. And then the last speculation that came out, which was one of the bigger headlines I think that came out of the trailer and the teasers that led up to the reunion being aired on HBO Max, were concerns over what seemed to be slurred speech by Matthew Perry, who is the actor that played Chandler on the show, Chandler Bing. And it was in the trailer, and it was a very short snippet of him saying he thinks he's going to cry. And so what I want to say to this is, if you're just watching the trailer and that part of the trailer by itself, it does appear that his speech is a little bit different than what we're used to. But throughout the special, it is clear that he has the same sense of humor, the same wit, the same cadence, but just in a little bit of a different speed than during the show and kind of the years closer to when the show ended. And to be fair, all of them look a little different. They're all older, obviously. They all have had more life experience and more things happen to them. And they said that in the show and in the interviews where they're promoting this special, which is they've all been through a lot, but they've been there together as friends. So in that clip they were showing in the trailer, the scene that corresponded to it in the special was towards the end. So if you want to go and watch it, just be prepared that it's towards the end. But it was a scene where they were talking about, and he was quivering his voice because he was getting emotional, and like you said in the trailer, he was about to cry. And I don't know about you, but if I'm about to cry, if I know someone and if I see someone else crying, oftentimes you start losing control of a few things, especially sometimes your lips or the way you speak, and it kind of gets a little almost like you're nervous, but you're actually just getting emotional. And so to me, that's just a normal human thing. Yes, of course, there's been reports over the years of him struggling with substance abuse, and I'll just leave it I'll just say that. But of course, those things have effects on your brain and your appearance and your physical being and the way you perform. And so I think it's not a surprise, if that makes sense. And that scene was when they were talking about how special their bond is as a cast and being there for each other, and their story about how when they see each other out and about, whether it's at industry events or they just happen to run into each other somewhere, it seems they basically end up talking for the rest of the night, them two, with no matter who it is in the cast. And I thought that was a really, really special moment, and that is why I think Matthew Perry, who played Chandler, got so emotional, because I think we can interpret or infer from that he seems to be the one that had the most serious struggles as far as substance and abuse and addiction, and it appears that they have all been there for him no matter what. And so I think that's partially potentially why he was getting emotional as well. So let's get into my immediate thoughts in that first scene where we see the cast all walking in and seeing the set for the first time as a group all together. And my immediate thoughts were the chemistry between them is on another planet still after all these years, even though they don't see each other as much. It, by all accounts, what I've seen, they seem like they are still real friends. And I personally don't think that kind of chemistry can be faked. And they talk about this in the show. The big reason for that was that after that first season, and we'll talk about this later, but the casting was very intentional not to cast too big of stars in the cast, was because now in that first season or after the first season, they all, as they said, went through as a group of six this skyrocket to fame together, and they were all experiencing it together, and only them six really knew what that was like. And so that is, I think, like they said, it was engraved in their memory and in their brain that they are so close as friends, as this family. And so you see that right in that first scene and throughout the special. And I love that part, and I'll touch on that more a little bit later. But now, some of my favorite parts of the special were: one, I liked that they started from, like I just said, they started from the last scene of the show that we see in the original run. And then they segue that into showing what happened as they all left that door of the apartment, and them kind of getting emotional and hugging the producers and the creators, and kind of the behind the scenes of that final take, which I thought was a great bridge to the reunion and the special. Now, with that said, then they really, I'm not going to do a full recap, but they started going into introducing the different kind of things they'll cut to, whether it be the scene by the fountain on the lot with James Corden, or them in the set kind of reminiscing, or to interviews of guest stars, or to them doing a table read of a certain scene or a famous scene. But I really liked them recreating some of the scenes in front of a live studio audience. And the main one was the quiz show scene from the original show, when the boys, Chandler and Joey, faced off against Monica and Rachel for the apartment, because they basically wanted to swap the apartment or whatever. They went in this whole betting back and forth, and it got so high of stakes that they ended up betting the apartment. Ross was the host. Of course, in the recreation, we have Lisa Kudrow, who played Phoebe, there as well, which in the original scene, she was not a part of it. But I love that they use that as an anchor to kind of introduce some of the guest stars that came back as part of the reunion, which you'll have to watch the special to see that, who comes back in that case, which guest stars come back in that scene in particular, if you haven't already seen the news come out about it. So another favorite part of mine was that they had a mix of both actors not on the show but in the industry, and non-actors mixed in about why they love the show and what impact it had on them. And it really was and one of the ones was Mindy Kaling, who was there to kind of explain, as an industry person and someone who has created her own show and written her own show and started her own show, why, from a perspective as kind of a colleague or a peer in the industry, why this show and this cast were so good. And I also could see why some fans maybe wouldn't like that, because it was a reunion of the cast. And oftentimes the special, like I said in the beginning, didn't necessarily focus on the reunion of the original cast. It was a lot of times on other people telling their perspective and focusing on other people and their perspective of the show and the cast. So it was kind of a mix of focusing on other people, but using them as a way to tell and give context more to the story and the impact of the show. So I wonder what the thought process was behind the direction they ended up taking with this special, and if there were any other ideas pitched that would have really changed the way the special aired and played out. So another favorite part of mine was the interlude, basically, with Lady Gaga singing Smelly Cat with Phoebe, Lisa Kudrow, and the choir coming out and kind of giving a throwback to the episode where Phoebe gets to record Smelly Cat professionally, and they dub over her voice with a different person's voice, and they have the whole production and whatnot. And the reason I like this is because in the original show, the Pretenders, the group, the singer of the Pretenders, Chrissy Hind, was a guest star on the show and sang Smelly Cat with Phoebe. And so I thought it was cool that they took a current singer who, as we learn in that, which at the end of them singing, Lady Gaga says that Phoebe, as kind of the weird character, really inspired her as someone who grew up in New York, and inspired her as an artist to really show that. And that's kind of what we know Lady Gaga for being about accepting who you are, born this way, embracing your quirks and whatnot. And so I know there was some backlash on this, and some people were wondering why Lady Gaga was involved, but I actually thought it was the perfect fit as far as current artists who are big enough to be recognized when they walk through the door, having her dressed in a Phoebe-esque outfits and having the interaction with Smelly Cat, and the fact that in the original show there was a well-known singer who did the same thing. I actually liked that. And then the last favorite part that I want to share for now is when they were talking about watching the show themselves, the cast, about if they ever watched these episodes. And they were all kind of saying they don't often watch it, but now that some of them have kids, they watch it with their kids, or their spouses watch it with them now. And they think it's weird to watch because it's them on screen, and they know that they're the actors and whatnot. But as a fan, I was actually really happy that they said this, to be honest, because I want them to keep the fond memories of the show, because I think when things come out about shows that are beloved in general, like you hear some behind the scenes feuds or some behind the scenes relationships that don't jive with what we saw on screen. And it doesn't appear that Friends has had any major scandals with the cast relationships with each other, at least. I mean, we've heard some like writers' room situations that have come up that have become pretty famous, but it doesn't appear that it has affected the cast relationship, which I think at the end of the day is the most important, because those are the characters and the people we've come to love. But when things come out about the show's cast and some feuds or some relationships that aren't, like I said, compatible with what we see on screen, it kind of ruins the magic. So if for the cast, as long as they keep the magic between them and they don't let their perspective of the show be ruined, I think as a fan, personally, that is what I want. Now let's get into some of my least favorite parts. What I wish they had done different was actually started with the first scene, which was the intro of them walking in. And I already said before, I liked that they started there where they walk in and kind of see the set, but I kind of wish they had done it one-on-one, meaning they started with Ross or David Schwimmer. He got to walk through the set, and then they sent him to like a green room or a backstage or whatnot. And then each one did it one by one to get their true reactions by themselves before seeing any of the other cast. But then again, I think this show was so good because it was an ensemble, and we learned that David Schwimmer, which has been a rumor, and I think it's been confirmed, but before this, but David Schwimmer, who played Ross, that character was created with his voice in mind. And so for him to walk in first made sense. And as each cast member walked in behind him, and they kept adding to the group until we saw all six there, and it just clicked. And so I don't know if they intentionally did that, or if they thought of different scenarios in that case. But while I think they could have done it the other way, like I said, I understood after they had all gotten there why they went in one at a time and just started adding to the group and started seeing each other as they walked in. And maybe it was almost like reminiscent of what happened when they were originally filming the show and kind of the order in which people would get there. I don't know. But I thought it was a good scene overall, but that was one thing I thought maybe they could have done different. Also, one other thing that I didn't really like was the fountain scene where they walked out and they were sitting in front of the fountain with James Corden, and it was annoying and it was loud. Well, we didn't hear it in the sound for us. Obviously, for them, it probably was really loud. And so he went and turned it off. Now, I don't know if this was kind of an Easter egg or a slight throwback to the opening credits of the show when they're all sitting on the couch and then they pull the lampshade and it turns off all the lights. I don't know if it was the same idea or if they had already planned and set up everything for the fountain and they didn't really think this through, so they had to last minute add a part where James could turn it off, or they had to show that in there so that way when they turned it off, us as fans, it made sense what was happening. I don't know if they planned that or if they just meant to embrace the challenge, but it was just an interesting part. I was like, did they really think all this through? Or maybe an indication that this wasn't the most well thought out reunion considering the circumstances of the world, and maybe they didn't know when they would get to film it and they got a green light really quick and they had to throw stuff together really quick. I don't know. So my overall least favorite part of the reunion was how short the reunion was, and I think instead of them doing one almost 2 hour reunion, they could have done, I think, a few different parts. Meaning, because in the special we see them cutting to different things throughout the special, so it kind of rotates through these. Sorry, I just hit the mic. So I think they could have done a whole like 1 to 2 hour part of them on set reminiscing about the show, just the six of them just in the living room or in the guy's apartment, whatever, just kind of talking about, or in Central Perk, just talking about things. Then another special could have been them recreating the scenes with former guest stars popping in like they did with the quiz show, or them doing the table read as one part of it. Then they could have done one special on the lot in front of that fountain with James Corden and had that be a whole hour in itself. And then one of them with famous fans and fans in general talking about the show, which is what they were kind of cutting into here and there on the special. They could have done, I think, a whole thing, kind of a retrospective of fans of the show who are available. And the reason I say this is because they clearly had a ton of footage, because there were multiple extras from different parts of the show that were a part of HBO Max, were kind of 5 minute little vignettes. But again, I get why they probably couldn't, for scheduling purposes, and the circumstances of the world probably made it even more difficult to get people there and get people involved, and their options were probably limited. But I think also because it is on a streaming service, they could have gotten away with it and milked the reunion, putting for like a whole month, really putting out one part each week leading up to the final part, which is like the part everyone wants to see. So, and that could have really owned the news cycle, because in a time where there isn't much new content going out there, especially after a year of things being very, very much so interrupted regarding scheduling of new and filming of new shows, and heading into summer where there aren't usually as many new shows, but before the return of the fall TV season, which this fall appears that everything will be kind of back to normal, if you will, or at least we'll have new shows across the board. I think they could have really milked it on the HBO streaming service, own the new cycle, because we got word of the trailer not too long ago, and it came quick. The news cycle really hit on it quick. It premiered, and the news cycle is already really dying down regarding the reunion. And this was supposed to be a huge deal. So I don't know. Maybe we'll get kind of another cut of it, or a round two. I don't know. Hopefully, maybe the fan reaction will allow for that, or they'll have bonuses or extras. I don't know. But that was one thing I thought overall, as a fan, I would have liked to see more and kind of see them break up each little part into their own specials. But then again, in a year where a lot of profits were taken or not able to happen, I can understand if they were trying to make this really profitable and really use this as an anchor to get people to HBO Max and to be watching old episodes of Friends and the reunion and just everything in general. So they could have been having that angle as just a brand awareness thing for HBO Max. All right, so now I wanted to touch on a few things that I wanted as a fan of the show and that they delivered on, which was, or to see if they delivered on it or not. So as far as favorite scenes and them kind of revisiting them or talking about them, I did like that they interspersed that into the show, and that they used the quiz show scene, which I think is one of my favorite episodes. And I know a lot of people who clearly, I mean, it's their favorite episode, but clearly it's the cast and the crew and some of their favorite episodes as well. And so I liked that. I liked that they touched on the famous outfits. I liked that they reminisced about their favorite parts and some of the episodes um, that were memorable and funny to have bloopers to and whatnot. So I think that was cool. And the fact that some of the favorite scenes were hit on by fans of the show who were kind of famous fans, I thought that was good as well. And then as far as guest stars go, I liked that they brought back the actress who played Janice, the actor who played Gunther. They brought back Reese Witherspoon, who played Rachel's sister. We had the Geller parents, the actors who played them were in the audience at the James Corden scene. We had Tom Selleck, who played Richard, who came back. Of course, we like to see a ton more, and we heard there's news out that why wasn't Paul Rudd involved, who ended up marrying Phoebe? Why wasn't one of the spouse twins involved, who played Ross's son? So, of course, they can't get everyone in there. And maybe they were intending to do what I kind of said, which was have multiple parts of the specials or multiple specials as part of the reunion. And maybe they just didn't have enough guest stars and whatnot to kind of do separate parts. So we don't know what went on behind the scenes, but maybe we'll find out one day. I was actually really happy as a fan because about the behind the scenes stories of the show, because I always like watching bloopers and kind of watching some videos online about the show and kind of some of the history and the stories behind it. And so I like that we got more stories directly from the people who casted the show regarding the casting, regarding the pilot creation, and the origins of the opening credits, which are now very iconic, and the story about how they shot the episode where they were getting ready all in the one apartment, and Matt LeBlanc, who plays Joey, hurt his arm, and then that episode, which was supposed to be one of the easier episodes to film, they ended up having to reshoot it later on once he healed, and they wrote it into the show and all that. I liked all those storylines because I don't know if we had really heard about it in that way directly from the people who were there and obviously give firsthand testimonials. So I thought that was really satisfying as a fan. Now, also as a fan, I am glad they addressed the rumors and the questions about any romances between the cast off screen. And so the main thing that came out of this was Jennifer Aniston and David Schwimmer, who played Ross and Rachel. They revealed that they had crushes on each other early on in the series, and they showed some behind the scenes footage of them kind of being flirty. But like they said in the show, they both had relationships. They were both either in a relationship or the other one wasn't, and vice versa, so that never happened. They also mentioned how that was for the better for the show because a hookup gone sour might have ruined the chemistry of the group. And the big theme and the big takeaway from the show is that their chemistry is so great, even to this day. And so I, as a fan, am happy that they addressed that and they kind of put those rumors to bed. I liked that they reminisced about their favorite guest stars, which there's a ton of them between Jennifer Aniston's ex, Brad Pitt, and Danny DeVito, who's one of my favorite ones. And there's just a ton of them. Brooke Shields. There's just a lot. So also, I'm glad that towards the end they talked about how the ending of the show was a good place for it to end after 10 seasons. And that as a fan watching, that last episode, even though I don't remember watching it live when it happened, but when I went back and watched the whole series and I've seen that at last episode, I watch that episode wanting more, but knowing that they had a good run. And so I think it was good that they ended on a high and didn't burn out the show and get to a point where it was like it needed to end, if that makes sense. And it didn't ruin the ending of the show. I personally didn't like the Rachel and Joey storylines that were happening, I think in season 8 and 9. And from what I've seen, that was supposed to go further, that storyline. But because they ended up getting word ahead of time that they were going to wrap after 10 seasons, that they had to pivot, pun intended. And in the end, I think the ups and downs of Ross and Rachel and that Joey storyline, even though I didn't like the Joey storyline, made the ending of Friends, spoiler alert, when Ross and Rachel end up together. In what fashion after that, we don't know. And whatever that meant, Ross and Rachel being together, I think it made that ending that much better. So I think it all ended up working out the way it was supposed to. And then the talk of them about the future of their characters and the show in general and just the storyline in general, they made it very clear that this was the last reunion and there was going to be no official reboot, whether the creators agreed on that and the cast. And as a fan of this show for so long, and it's been engraved in my being for my whole life, I think it is the right move. And we know the actors off screen too much and we know the characters too well on screen that I think it clearly doesn't need any sort of reboot or any sort of extension of the storyline because of streaming and because of new generations loving the show just as much as the generation who watched the first time. I think it's best if we just let this show live and kind of make up in our head kind of what we think the future or what they would be doing now. And also, I think it is good knowing that the cast are still friends in real life. And for me as a fan, that is all I need to know and to keep the show great in my head. So now let's go on to more general comments that didn't really fit those categories, which I just touched on. I really like them talking about the casting process, and that's the part where we learned stuff I hadn't heard before. I don't know if you as a fan have heard that. Now, there was comments about Monica being played by Courteney Cox and how Monica, the character, ended up having a bigger part in the show than they originally thought she would, or at least a bigger impact, and how important that casting ended up being because Courteney was supposed to play Jennifer Aniston's character Rachel, but Courteney told them she was more of a Monica, and so in real life, and so this to me kind of confirmed what I was always suspicious of, which is that, from my understanding, Courteney Cox, out of all the six of the actors, was the only one who did not get an Emmy nomination, and I think that's kind of a travesty, even though I don't think all of them won an Emmy. I think just knowing that is kind of a bummer, but that's probably why they just kind of gloss over it, I think. And then as far as the audience that was live in the backlot of Warner Brothers, I thought the audience question part, they only took one, I think, or two audience questions, or one audience question, I think, and it was only really to set up that the other audience member question was the Geller parents in the audience. But I wonder if that person who stood up and asked those questions, if they were really a fan or if they were kind of an actor that was hired as audience members. But I wonder if there was more footage from that. And I think, honestly, if they would have, like I said, done multiple parts for each kind of setup, then maybe they could have had a lot of fans on the backlot with them in another time, maybe the state of the world didn't allow for that, but have fans come from around the world to the set and to the backlot and ask them questions. I think that could have been really cool. And then another general comment, and it also goes kind of to the behind the scenes part, which is that it's very clear, and I remember seeing this in another special they did. I think it was one that aired when the show was still airing, but it's been re-uploaded to YouTube and whatnot, that producers really, and writers and people involved really listened to the live audience for direction. And I think that to me is why this show is so funny and so great, is because, and so supported by the fans, is because it appears that even before social media, which is when this show was created and aired, where they now could read online reactions and get a feel of how the audience is reacting. Of course, I think back then they would do like test groups like in person and watch shows and give feedback. But even back then, on set during taping of episodes, they had their pulse on what the fans wanted to see and made it work. And so I think that to me is, and that was a huge theme of the special, was kind of thanking the fans or showing how much the fans were involved in the show and how they're the reason that the show is so big. I think that was a great thing that they highlighted and really indicates to me why the show is so good. So now I want to know from you, what level of Friends fan are you? Because I'm the type that had seen clusters of episodes on cable TV, whether it's like TBS or TV Land or whatever the channel is, or Nick at Night, and on reruns over the years. And then once I got conscious of what was on the TV, I would eventually start choosing that over other shows that were on at the same time. And I was born in the early years of the show's original run, and it's one of my family's favorite shows. So it was subconsciously, I think, a part of me. And I think we have all the seasons on DVD too. But I really hadn't watched every episode in order from beginning to end until the series was on Netflix, and then of course now it's on HBO Max, which is where I began a second run of the show in order. But I am also the fan that would like I said before, watching bloopers on YouTube or videos about kind of the history and behind the scenes stuff or trivia about it. So let me know what type of Friends fan you are and what you thought of the special. Did you have some similar thoughts as me that I expressed here, or did you see anything that I missed? Let me know, and wherever you can comment. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to hear me and my thoughts on this. And I will talk to you in the next one. Bye bye.